Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Swamp Thing as well as the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like always, I'm going to talk about something that you want to listen to. You can always look in the description down below. I click the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Swamp Thing, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Swamp Thing. Okay, so a few things to break down about this episode is obviously we have those two people out there in the woods, one of them being that dude Todd. They come across that body and everything, which is interesting. I guess it's almost just, maybe it's not just serendipity that the body just happened to fall at that point in time. You know, maybe there's some greater, maybe it's all kind of connected that it just happens to fall then. But it turns out Todd ended up getting scratched by the body and it looked like something went inside of him. But when he gets back, he starts hallucinating. And it seems like this, whatever it is, it seems like this darkness draws out your greatest fear. In Todd's case, it was a snake, and he started stabbing and cutting at his own arm, even going as far as sticking his arm into a disposal. That brutal as hell. But then he scratches Delroy, Liz's dad, who he starts hallucinating, which actually his hallucination is super sad because obviously it's about the night his mom died, you know, like mass people broke in and killed his mom. It's like, Jesus. You know, he was a little kid. And to have a memory like that. I'm wondering, is it supposed to be a situation of it, like it was a memory? I would assume so because it's supposed to be his greatest fear. Or was it just something he never saw personally, but just knowing what happened? Either way, that's kind of sad to see that be the case. But then it like passes from him to the sheriff. And then, you know, the sheriff, you know, hers is seeing Matt die, and it makes sense because you can tell she's a mother, so she cares so much about her boy, so it's understandable. But then Abby gets scratched and goes back to woods. Hers now is very interesting. Essentially, she used to dream about this faceless creature kind of person, and it's like after her mom died, it went like the nightmares kind of stopped because of like she would always dream that this person was coming to take her and her mom away, essentially, but. I'm wondering, is that supposed to mean something more? Because I was wondering, like, is that supposed to become like a manifestation of like her dad or something? Because like her mom's come up in conversation, not her dad. And once again, like her family isn't something that's really been tackled yet. And I'm curious, is that something that's going to pop up later on or not? You can talk about everyone else's family situation, but what about Alec? We didn't hear anything about his family. Maybe that'd be something later on potentially. You know, considering the show's circumstances. So maybe that's something we'll never get tackled in the show, but we'll see. But nevertheless, it's pretty interesting, like, because, it's funny, because the moment I'm like, it is kind of interesting that Alec knows all this stuff, the moment I think that Abby asked him, how do you know all this stuff? It's like, for him, it's like the plants and the trees are telling him all this information. Because you can tell he's kind of like, because it's like, no, he was just like a normal dude. And it seems like he's quickly got associated with like, oh, he's kind of, and I like that too, like a character that's kind of like in the know about all that's going down. Because even though he's not necessarily in the know, he's so connected with the woods. The woods are kind of, the swamp, the trees and plants are looking at him as their savior, as kind of like their guardian. So it's like, you are here to make sure what's in this swamp stays in the swamp, and that ends up being this thing that isn't necessarily a virus, it's a darkness, and it feeds off the darkness and drowns people in their own darkness, till they kind of go insane or cause more havoc. There have been multiple occasions, like obviously what happened with Delroy and as well as Lucilia, like they had their weapons out and stuff like that. Delroy's case, he was shooting wild. Lucilia had her gun out in front of a crowd of people. Like, a lot more people could have gotten hurt. Luckily, it's not lucky for Todd, but he was the only casualty in his situation, fortunately enough. But it's interesting, too, because Alec was able to pull out the darkness. Maybe it was in him such a short amount of time that it didn't affect him. So I'm curious, would that have been able to affect him as Swamp Thing? Or, does he have some natural... it seems like it was weighing down on him, absorbing all that darkness, because I think it was trying to eat away at him. Maybe because his circumstances are a little bit different, but I'm wondering, would he have seen anything if it had stayed in him for a long period of time? Well, that was kind of interesting, because he puts it back inside of the body, and then the swamp itself kind of drags him on, like, the... body of the dead guy, because we hear that this isn't the first time. Obviously, like, that body got there because this happened years and years ago, where like it started with a war vet and then it trickled down until it got to this last guy, but he just up and disappeared. He went to the forest and killed himself to make sure that it stayed and died with him, whatever was inside of him. So But now the forest is making so that never it happens again. Like no one could ever find that body. It's almost interesting the way Alec was describing it too. It's like he said it was never. It's almost like he was, because obviously we can tell he can kind of communicate on maybe like a spiritual level. So when he touched the body, maybe he connected to the dude, and maybe the dude's spirit was telling him like, we have to bring that back. You have to bring it back to me. I wanted it to die with me, and it needs to be like that. And so he does. And to make sure no one does it again, the forest or swamp, I keep saying forest, but swamp responded by like burying his body and pulling it underground. So that's very interesting. And obviously, you know, Alec, once again, like I said, bringing up how much he knows, and the fact is he's in tune with a lot of stuff, to the point, like, obviously kind of showing, like, once again, it's that thing of, like, how much is just him, and how much is him, like, you know, the plant's kind of responding to what he wants, because it's like, oh, like, some, like, foliage or whatever kind of moves away to kind of make a path for Abby. And even at one point, like, I'm sure that's more so him, but when it went to the boat that Abby was on and pulled her closer like that, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. But also, I thought it was kind of a neat thing that every time he popped up earlier, in the beginning and middle of the episode, except for the end is the first time he's gotten close to Abby subsequently since her finding out about his situation. Because I think he's scared of his situation, he doesn't understand it, so he doesn't want her to be nearby, because I think he's a little scared of himself, and he's probably scared of the way she might look at him or feel, you know? So even to the point, like, she needs a sample, so he extends out the plants from his hand and gives her a sample like that, so... which she examines. Then Jason was like, oh, your stuff is wrong. It's either, you know, stuff from a plant or an animal. It can't be both, so your calculations must be wrong. He looks into it and is like, okay, something's definitely interesting here. I wonder, does he see the roots, interesting choice of words on my part, of, you know, his accelerant or not? Or does he not realize the two are connected? Because whatever it is that Abby's looking into, he wants to be a part of. But Abby's like, she's reluctant to get him involved because obviously it's like, one, you're working for Avery, and I think she probably thinks like, well, Avery's connected to the whole Alec thing. Like, not necessarily connected to but she thinks like Avery's got his hand in a lot of stuff that's going down. So there's that. Potentially, you know, Alec getting killed. Like I said, potentially being the one who actually pulled the trigger, but we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. But it's also a situation of like, you work for him, so anything you say will probably end up going back to him. But he's like, who cares if I'm working for Avery? And she kind of like, wait, what? And then it's like, I don't want this to get out to the world. He's like, why would I give a damn about the world? So for Jason, it's a situation of like, oh man, this is so fascinating. I can't wait to study it. Maybe it's because he knows it has something to do with his accelerant, or maybe just because, well, could we also know that his wife is sick? So maybe it's like, oh, his accelerant and everything that he's doing with Avery isn't just for Avery's sake. Maybe it's also for his sake, because it's like, oh, with what he has planned and stuff, going down in the swamp using the accelerant and stuff like that, it could potentially be something useful to help his wife. That's my thought process. Maybe I brought that up last episode, but I feel like I did. I don't remember. Nevertheless, but that is definitely going to be an interesting situation. I think when the time comes, like, just because we kind of got a little bit of it in the trailer, I want to say it might have been in the full trailer, it might even been in the teaser. I don't remember, or one of the teasers. I think it was, you know, I'm curious, like, will he bring this to Avery? I feel like he won't, but maybe he will, because it's like, oh, like, my employer wants some results, I have to give him some results so we get off my back type of thing. But it's kind of the thing of like, Abby kind of doesn't have anyone else in town to talk to because the CDC packed up because everyone's kind of good, but Abby knows that there's still more to this because obviously she's trying to help out Alec. That's her main reason for staying, because she knows there's definitely something else along with Alec. There's something in Murray, but obviously she can't really tell anyone. The only person that knows at this point is Liz. We also kind of got we'll go ahead and talk about it. Avery. This is a very interesting episode of Avery. We already saw last episode how far he's willing to go, but I think it's kind of a principle that he kind of got from his dad, because there's that whole moment with the crocodile and everything, or is it alligator? Probably an alligator. I think it's an alligator. I don't honestly know the difference. I'm ignorant like that. But his dad was like, okay, you won't do it, I'll do it. So I guess that type of thing of like, sometimes when there's action needed, like you kind of let your fear kind of get the best of you. And I guess that changed Avery. I mean, because literally cutting back and forth between him not being able to kill an alligator to the point, because it's like, oh, look at his dead eyes, look at his swamp eyes, but at hard cut to like obviously him present day, kicking a body into a fire pit to burn, so that speaks a lot on Avery's part. But also the fact is he is very, very manipulative, because it almost seems like, he's like, I'm so sorry about the memories that Abby's causing you by being here. It almost seemed like when Marie was walking away, he was smirking. I'm like, so you even inviting Abby to the party, it almost seemed like you're doing that so you will push a button in Marie. And it's like, I thought that in itself was supposed to be something, but it's connected to it. Because obviously the moment Marie starts hanging out with Susie, I'm like, she sees Shauna anytime she looks at Susie, doesn't she? But it kind of seems like that case, because it's like, well, you lost your only child, so you're kind of looking for a replacement. Not really looking for a replacement, but you could tell immediately that's what's going on. The sick and twisted part is that Avery takes advantage of that situation, and it's like, oh man, Susie, oh man, she's going with her uncle. Oh, her Uncle Lee's got all these kids already. They be stretched thin, and it's like, oh, this whole situation's not done. But obviously the CDC's acting like it is, but obviously they left Abby behind, but they don't really know what's going on here. But whatever the case may be, Jason will figure it out. Whatever it is, he'll find a cure for this whole situation. And then we get twofold of scummy. One, he's literally buying Susie from her uncle. It's like, that's nasty. You are just that manipulative a person, and that means that he's buying her because he wanted it. Because the moment he's like, oh, she should stick around, I'm like, you're manipulating your wife. It's like, I was like, how is this going to... That's what I was wondering when that was happening. I was like, I knew this had to be about the money she wouldn't give you last episode, but I'm like, what does that have to do with Susie? I was like, oh no, because now she's going to give all her money to Jason to fund his research and potentially find a cure for Susie, even though she seems like she's okay. She's kind of the most like in the know and okay with this whole situation because she seems not affected. Obviously, she still has her connection to Alec, but still. So far, she looks okay. Like, I guess whatever's there inside of her ended up subsiding. Maybe not permanently, but we'll see. But what also ties into that is just like the whole fact is that like she's unwillingly going to know, like obviously she's going to be supporting Jason, not realizing she's supporting her husband. Like, because in the end, it's almost like, and who cares how I'm going about it? Give my wife a project to work on to keep her busy. It's like, oh, motherhood, essentially, kind of like, oh, we lost a daughter, which is messed up because it's like, that was your child too, but to manipulate your wife into a situation like that, it's kind of shitty. Even though you make all these claims, like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry about what happened, and it wasn't just you who lost Shauna, I did, but Maria even said it herself of like, you didn't have the relationship with her like I did, which we kind of know. Like, that's why it's hitting her harder. To be fair, who's to say it didn't hit Avery hard? But I think it's that thing of like compartmentalizing, and I think he compartmentalizes like no one else's business. The way he's just kind of able to just do this nonchalant, just walk away after buying a child off her uncle. That's just twisted. And once again, using your wife's grief and sadness to manipulate her into giving you the money that you need to do what you want. Because that's what you can make it claims about, like, oh, it's for other people. But at the end of the day, it's just for you, for your own interests. So that itself is very, very interesting and very telling. So there's also another side of this as well, and it has to deal with Daniel and Xanadu. Because, like, Daniel's like, okay, I'm supposed to help out Abby, but in what way? I'm not too sure. And Xanadu brings up some interesting, obviously she knows something's coming. She's like, there's a storm coming to this town and it's going to change everything. It's going to change this town. Like, everyone's going to be affected. And Daniel's kind of like, so something's happening in this town just when my cards change. Like, okay, there's something there. And Xanadu's kind of saying, like, basically he came here like 8 years ago to Murray and he made some deal. It's almost like maybe he tapped into something spiritual and he made a deal like, okay, I'll stay here until my job is done. Like, I thought he was particularly running away from something. Maybe he was. But at the very least, he made a bargain with somebody. But it almost sounds like it was the town itself. Like, whereas it seems like Alec is tapped into something, it seems like Daniel's tapped into something. I mean, just like Xanadu is. She's like, once again, it's like, it seems like they're shifting towards, because like even Abby and Alec are like, yeah, this isn't the science that we thought we understood. Like, there's definitely something more here. Like, obviously with this darkness, we're definitely seeping into that more supernatural side of things in those regards. So I'm curious what Daniel's whole deal is. Is even to the point Xanadu is like, the fact of the matter is, kind of referencing him as a hero, and I'm like, is he actually going to end up being revealed to be somebody? Well, just because I came across something recently, I didn't read too much, I think it was like a video title, maybe it was even an article, I don't remember what it was quite, but it was kind of like the show's potential plans, what they had planned out, like obviously before the whole cancellation situation. So, which still bothers me. I still hope that in some shape or form that ends up changing. Mostly unlikely, but I'm still hopeful. What's interesting is like their plans, what they were potentially setting up of Swamp Thing. So I'm like, there might be fruits of that here in the season 1 already. Like, and it's like maybe it's connected to Daniel. Like, if you, I don't want to kind of, well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. It's apparently they were supposed to be 3 seasons of the show, and their plan was to eventually lead to a Justice League Dark spinoff, which is interesting. Like I said, I brought it up before, like referencing Constantine and just Swamp Thing. I know that they're part of Justice League Dark, but I'm wondering, does Daniel play some role in that? Like, who is he potentially? What this could all be? Yeah, it makes my brain think. I'm sure I'm overthinking it. For whatever reason, my head goes, Dr. Fate? I don't think so. I don't think that's who Daniel's supposed to be. I don't think, because I don't remember. I never remember Dr. Fate's real name. Like, I still don't, like, I know bits and pieces about him, but not that much. But it's like, is he connected to the Justice League Dark? I'm not even sure. Like, would they even do that? Like I said, I don't know. Like, I'm probably just being stupid, but nevertheless, I'm just curious, like, what Daniel's role is going to be. If you know, don't let me know. Like, wait till everything's over to let me know if you know. Just because I want to be surprised when it comes up. I'm like, oh, I potentially know who he's supposed to be. You know, I'd rather kind of find out on my own. So, everything I ask is typically a rhetorical question in certain regards like that, I should point out. But nevertheless, I'm very interested to see what his story is. I mean, he ended up helping out Abby this episode when it came to taking Lucilia, kind of getting the gun away from her and everything. So he helped out in that regard, but I'm sure for him, his job and mission definitely aren't over, and I'm interested to see what goes beyond that. Because even Xanadu was like, yeah, I might not be here to help, but obviously it's going to be your time soon, like, kind of your hero moment or something, So I'm interested to see where that, along with everything else, ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., a great episode. It's so interesting. Obviously, you have Fitz and Simmons finally being reunited and everything. It's like, oh, and not only are they reunited again, they can actually touch each other, and it's awesome and it's beautiful. But it turns out they're stuck in a kind of a prison of sorts. They eventually find out it's a prison, made from their own minds and everything. But what I love about it is, like, obviously there's a whole conversation of like, oh yeah, we went to the future and everything. But Simmons is super reluctant to talk about everything that went down. And just that's the beginning of everything kind of shifting, and I love it. It's like at first, her reluctancy to talk about the future, she turns into like her 7-year-old self. Actually, was it 7.5? She goes hiding in her room and everything. And like Fitz is trying to talk to her and everything, and it's like her room. This is where she goes when she wants to, understand and learn about the stars, and also where she comes to kind of solve any problems that she has. And she's like, will you read me this book? And Fitz is like, no, I don't want. And she's like, Daddy, there's some strange man in my room. He's like, fine, I'll read the book for you. And I love it. And it's like, oh, it's basically a story. Now, I'm curious. It seems like in that book of Simmons, it seems like obviously she's the princess looking for her prince, Fitz. And Enoch, I couldn't tell what Enoch was, but he was kind of like, his imaginary friend or something like that. But you could tell, like, Daisy was the rabbit, and, like, the bear, I'm assuming that, it's hard to say whether that's Piper or Davis, because whoever the one is, I'm assuming maybe Davis, but I was also thinking maybe Piper, because maybe she's very, like, raw or kind of scary. And I don't know. It's just interesting that they're all animals, which is kind of super adorable. But I love that. And so it's that, and it's like, oh, what is this book? Oh, it's the Darkhold, and Fitz was like, oh, no, that's a bad story. That's a really, really bad book. Don't read that. I love that. Which is funny because it's like I like that little wink and nod because it's like, oh yeah, because the last time we saw the Darkhold was Robbie was taking it wherever the hell he was going at the end of season 4. So there was that. But I love that, like, he's dealing with, Simmons as a kid, and it's like, wait a minute, what are you doing? He's like, these are basically the compounds to the beginning of TNT, because she's literally trying to blow a hole out of this prison. And he's like, you'd be better off making cocaine or unicorn tears or something. I love it. It's so good. And he's like, she's just like, you can't actually time travel, stupid. And it's just like, he's like, why don't you just grow up? And it just gets so frustrated. It's adorable. It's weird having to deal with a woman that you love who, turns into her 7.5-year-old self. That situation we all find ourselves in from time to time. I love it. And it's like, oh, how do I get you to switch things around. Oh, how about I get someone who can help me out? How about an LMD? How about that? Ooh, maybe get Ada to help me. And Simmons comes back to normal because she starts flipping out on him like, oh, how can you even think about doing it? He's like, no, I wasn't actually going to do it. I mean, oh, forgive me because I'm not the one who, forgive me because I'm the one who turned into my 7-year-old self and hid in my bedroom. So I love that. And it turns into this whole thing of like kind of reliving some of their memories, like an earlier memory of theirs in school and everything, which I thought was kind of adorable. Like him being like, oh yeah, this is the, it's like, oh, is this my memory or your memory? She's like, it's both of ours. So we shared it. He's like, oh yeah, this is the memory where it's like, oh, like I was a kind of nervous wreck around you, but then I became super comfortable. And she's like, yeah, and this is the moment I friend zoned you. And you see Fitz kind of look away like, oh, and it's like, oh, they kind of hit you hard. You're like, oh, that kind of sucks. I'm skipping over the big dramatic moment, and I thought that was so good because it's just because of what's in your brain, the world that that artificial world kind of reflects it, and it's like, okay, so Simmons can't help but think about, like, obviously because Fitz keeps bringing her to the future, she can't like hold back her thoughts about it, and memories kind of pop up. And Fitz discovers what happened to him. He died. Even I was kind of thinking it was a little awkward because the fact is, it's like, right, Fitz is proposing to you again. He's literally doing the same proposal too that she even says, we're unstoppable. And he's like, yeah. And she accepts it because obviously she doesn't want to tell Fitz the truth because it's too painful to admit, and just didn't want to kind of put so much strain on him to learn that truth. I mean, it's never good to know too much about your future to a certain extent. Once again, the whole paradox of the whole situation. But I find it so fascinating, like, it's like, holy crap, having to deal with that. It's like, man, it's sad too, because you hear like, oh yeah, out of anyone, Mac obviously took it really hard. It's like, of course, yeah, like Mac and, Fitz have been close for a very long time, so it's like, for him, it's like he wanted to give Fitz a proper burial, but obviously, Simmons wasn't in a good place at the time, like after everything she was kind of going through. But now Fitz, it's like, not only am I dead, also find out that I actually lived an entire life, also found out about it's like, I missed my wedding, and she's like, no, it just hasn't, happened yet, because obviously, like, he missed out on everything. It didn't even click in my head until, we see, I'm blanking, Coulson, walk into the room. I was like, right, you don't know about Coulson, because that was something you guys discovered in the future. I was like, oh, that's so crazy. Not only you find out that you're dead, you also find out your leader, your friend, part of your family is gone. And it's like, Jesus. It's kind of interesting. It never turned into this, but a plot point about the whole, like, oh yeah, like, you've already married Simmons technically. It's, to me, I'm surprised he didn't take it the wrong way. I mean, I guess the whole, causality and everything is like, technically that is me. It's still me, but it's still that whole thing of like, well, that's a you that went through a whole bunch of experiences, so can you still technically call that you? It's like, yes, at your core, it's still you. I thought it was going to turn into a whole, like, identity crisis thing of like, that's not me. Technically, you married a different person because, time and everything. But I mean, even with time and everything, it's still you. Once again, it's still a complicated thing because it's a paradox and everything, but still. So there's that. But what I love is that because they are in their minds and everything, they have to worry about Leopold, because obviously Simmons knows, because last season we saw, like, after getting back, Fitz dealt with that a lot, like kind of seeing and hearing his voice. And it's like, obviously when Fitz is because that's a piece of him that's kind of stuck there. Like, the framework is always going to have that little bit of because it taps into something that was kind of there in Fitz already. Because that whole, like, who he became in the framework wasn't out of nowhere. That was kind of based on something that was already there within him. So, crossing paths with him, that whole situation is interesting. But then there's also Simmons having her dark side too. And I love it. They're hiding in a closet from her. It's almost like a scary movie. I like this episode kind of having almost that horror element to it. But I love the fact is that Fitz is screaming like, oh my God, you want to complain about my dark side? What about you? She's like, I did what Daddy told me. Take all my pain and everything that's wrong, all that, put it in a little box, nice and neat and crushed. And Fitz is like, you need therapy because you have some deep, serious issues. And that's so interesting because you would never think that. I mean, to be fair, we've seen Simmons' dark side from time to time. Like when she tried to kill Ward, was that back in season 2? She tried to kill Ward. That was an example of that. I mean, even you see bits and pieces of it this season too. Like her intent of like willing to do whatever it takes to find Fitz kind of shows you that. But like she definitely has a darker side that she kind of keeps buried in everything. And I love that this episode was just like the biggest like emotional baggage episode of them dealing with so much stuff. Not only were they dealing with their own stuff, but it wasn't even technically them dealing with their own stuff. They kind of had to deal with each other's own stuff. Like Fitz had to face Simmons' darker side, and Simmons had to face Fitz's darker side, and just kind of breaking everything down. Like, calling Fitz. Leopold, Simmons being like, the fact of the matter is he needed to build a robot to stroke his ego or something like that. Obviously, he didn't appreciate that, but it's like, like, the fact is I found a very, a worthy companion, like someone on my same level as what he saw in, Ada. But what I love, it's like, they're in trouble, but it's like, we're not in this alone, we have each other. But it's not just each other we have our friends, and it's like the besties show up. Daisy shows up to save Simmons, and Max shows up to save Fitz. And I'm like, that's so cute. It's so awesome. Yay! Best friends to the rescue. It's pretty awesome. I mean, except for like Mac, he started getting his throat chewed out. But Daisy, obviously, is Daisy, so she was kicking ass. So that's no surprise. But then I love, it's like, they get trapped in a containment pod. And it's like, dude, that's almost every time for you guys. That happens. That's just complicated. And obviously, I'm surprised it didn't immediately trigger some very, very bad memories. But I love it while they're in there, they're throwing shade at each other about every little thing of like, you caused me pain. I love like Fitz throwing all that stuff about like, what about you and Will, the astronaut? Yeah, it's like, who, let's not forget, turned out to be Hive. Now, was that before? Can we really say that was after you had slept with him? And then you have Simmons being like, what about you literally building yourself a robot girlfriend? And he's like, you're skewing the truth here. And I'm just loving them constantly throwing stuff back and forth at each other. I skipped over it too, but I love like their first meeting with, when Coulson asked him to join his team and everything. Simmons was all on it, but then Fitz was like, no, let's think about it. And, it's like Simmons is like, he got me with that speech and everything. But Fitz is like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, what did you say? Like, there's nothing scary that's going to happen. And then, which is ironic, and that's the whole point I was trying to make. Because it's like, literally, all the terrible stuff that's happened to us since we joined Coulson's team. It's that type of situation of like, given a chance, would you undo it all? I don't know. I feel like Fitz would probably kind of agree just because all the terrible stuff that's happening. But to be fair, once again, he's dealing with all the stuff that's rummaging around their minds, but also finding out like, I died, Coulson died. It's just a whole bunch of pain. So it's understandable. Obviously, the complicated situation between him and Simmons always kind of being brought together and torn apart. Like I said, it was just the best therapy session anyone could ask for, and I loved it so much. Them throwing shade at each other about this and that. I love him being like, the fact of the matter is, what was it at one point he had said, like, the fact of the matter is, he's like, man, you got some serious issues. Like, I never knew that was a part of you. And she's like, who cares? Why does it even matter? It's like, it's buried deep down. And Fitz is like, wow, you really are British. And I'm like, because that's always a stereotype that like British people like not very like open about stuff like that. They gotta keep it buried deep down, which hey, I can sympathize with. I'm not British, but hell, I love to bury stuff. So I was like, I click with Simmons a lot in this episode. But it's so interesting to know that she's burying such darkness. I even love that Fitz kind of threw that in her face, being like, literally, my darkness came out, but what about yours? If it came out, the framework would have been like Night of the Living Dead. It's like, dude, which is so interesting. Just like I said, it's just like, obviously it's like, the fact is, and it's the whole thing of like, I'm always there for you. Like, we're always, stop trying to save me. It's like, I'm not trying to save you. It's like, yes, you are. After everything we've been through, this and that. And then we were drowning in the Atlantic. And then like, it starts flooding in here and Fitz. It's like, see, you just had to bring up that one. And it's like, it's just a whole complicated thing of like, they love each other. Like, and I love it. It's almost like this couple's counseling to a certain degree that they kind of had to face and deal with themselves. I love it. But at the end of it, kind of finding out, yeah, you hurt me, and yeah, you caused me a lot of pain, but that's only because I love you. I love you too. So why are we yelling at each other? I don't know. I love moments like that where it's just like the passion's rising. It just feels so good. And it's like you have Fitz Dark Fitz, Leopold, and Dark Simmons outside, like circling, waiting for them. And then they're like, all right, we're going to face this together, right? They hold each other's hand. It's like, together we're unstoppable. Go out. And lo and behold, Leopold and Dark Simmons are making out hardcore. And it's like, Simmons is like, okay. Okay. And I'm like, they're just staring at it. And she's like, whoa, I didn't know. He's like, Vince is like, oh, I didn't know you were into that. And she's like, I didn't know you could do that. And it's like, and I love that because that's adorable too, because it means even with their darker selves, like that means it's them loving, and no matter what the circumstances is, even if this is the stuff that they hide from their darker selves, they are kind of meant for each other, because even at their worst, they're still good for each other. They still love each other no matter what. And that's so beautiful and just so awkward, because it's like, yeah, like, oh, scary, scary, scary. And then like this moment happens. It's so good. I even love it that Atara shows up later on and she was like, well, that was a waste of like 5 minutes or something. I'm like, yes, I love that. Literally, this entire episode has taken course over 5 minutes and some change. I love stuff like that. Makes sense. You're in your head and everything, so time's going to work differently, but it was so freaking good. Like I said, I like the fact is, because Fitz and Simmons have always never really seen that side to each other. We've always seen Fitz's dark side because of the framework and everything, but like that whole side of Simmons, it's like we kind of seen peeks at it, but never fully seen it like that, which, geez, like to think about, that's still crazy to think about all of that's packaged in Simmons, because you wouldn't think so, because Simmons is very like optimistic and bubbly in some regards. Obviously, like the world can bring her down a lot of times too, but she's always got like a pep in her step. Like I feel like she's optimistic to like fits his like pessimism. Like they got like a yin yang thing going on of like opposites kind of attract. Yet there's a whole joke of them, like obviously it gets brought up in the episode of like them being the same brain. I even love Coulson being like, yeah, I thought you guys were the same person, like Fitz Simmons. Didn't realize you were two different people, but okay. So I really like that. Oh, it's just so freaking good, dude. I think it's such a good episode because like, and I think it's such a good push for their relationship too, because it's like, okay, we've seen like the worst sides of each other, and at the end of it all, we still love each other. We accept each other, realizing that the fact of the matter is we might feel this pain and hurt, but that's only because, this is always, it's one of those Kingdom Hearts things. I always kind of take to heart. I always think it's kind of beautiful. Hurting is just one side of caring, because it's like the fact is you hurt, you don't have to always just look at it as a bad thing, because it can be seen as like the positive twist to it is like, if you hurt, it's because that meant that you love someone, that they can hurt you like that. If you felt nothing, then it wouldn't mean as much, but the fact is, if you hurt from somebody, it's because they mean something to you. So that's all that's what this episode kind of reminds me of. And I love that Enoch ends up helping them out in the end. No surprise there, because for him, it's like, yeah, I want to save my people and stuff like that. But it's like, no, like, because for him, he understands humans a lot more than other Chronicons do, because it's like he spent so much time with them, especially spent so much time with Fitz, that he understands, like, yeah, them linking their brains together. Humans don't just have like physical issues and stuff like that they have to deal with. They have emotions. They have an emotional issues, and that's what he was saying was going to be an issue here. But no one else was really listening, because it's more about like, oh, we got to save our people. That's all that kind of matters. That's what comes first. But Enoch's about doing the right thing, because spending so much time with Fitz, not just being on the sidelines. Because it's so interesting, because like obviously like he was more of an observer, Enoch was, but obviously he's shown like the fact is that he's willing to go through the lengths he did to save Earth. And obviously now it's like, oh, obviously I potentially helped save Earth, but now it's like my own planet is in that state it's in. So but luckily he saves Fitz and Simmons, and I love before they teleport away, and she's like, also I should probably know you are a grandfather. He's like, wait, what is that? And doesn't even get, it's like, right, because I'm about to say, oh, you're not going to mention I guess you don't. I was like, I guess you don't want to mention the whole grandfather situation, just because it'd be like, oh yeah, putting more pressure on him, because it's like, oh, that means we're going to have a kid, and then we're going to eventually have Deke. But it's like, nah, you drop that on him at the end of the episode. I love it. It's kind of like, oh yeah, also there's this. So yeah, it's kind of all out there in the open. Not all of it, because there's still the whole conversation about everything they went through. Because let's not forget, he doesn't know everything. He saw Yo-Yo's hands, but it probably didn't click in his head to be like, oh, what's that about? Because Yo-Yo didn't have that last time he saw her. It's actually kind of interesting because it's like, oh yeah, why didn't Yo-Yo go? Because for her, it's like, and it kind of, I love how like the memories kind of, it's like, oh, these conversations mean something because it's like, because she felt, because Yo-Yo's reason for staying with Mac was like, hey, he's going through so much right now. He's taking a lot on himself that if I'm not around, he might break. And that was what she needed to hear because she needed to be there for Fitz before he ended up breaking because of the whole potential Leopold situation. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating how that kind of worked out like that. It's also a little thing too that I really liked, that basically every time they were in a memory, it wasn't just like, oh, they were there watching the memory. They became a part of the memory. They would substitute for themselves in that memory, but they'd kind of play it out, but they'd be conscious of like, oh yeah, like once again, it's like, oh yeah, this memory, is it mine or yours? It's like, no, it's both of ours, that type of thing. So I love that. And then there's everything on Earth, the little bit we get with Mac and Daisy, Mac explaining like, no, it's going to be good. Those two together, they've probably already broken out, which they had. And then Daisy, learns, it didn't even click on my head to think, right, the Shrike that, is that what they're called? I'm blanking already. I think in my notes I said Shrike, but I could be a complete and utter idiot. But the creatures, obviously, May learned about last episode from Sarge and his people. It's like, okay, so what, that day destroyed planets. It didn't even cross my mind to think, all right, what happened to Chronica 2 was them. It didn't even click in my head to even think that, but it makes sense. And I love him being like, yeah, those guys are, and Daisy's like, here? And he's like, yeah, you kind of stepped on my moment there, but yeah, they're here. And it's just like, okay. And obviously Daisy's got to be brought up about everything, which that's going to be complicated too, because next to May, she's the one that had the strongest ties and relationship to Coulson. He was kind of like a father to her, father figure, especially with the complicated relationship she has with her own that whole deal with her mom and dad, which the things with her dad kind of worked out. Obviously, like, she can't have the relationship she would want to with him because, remember, they kind of gave him new memories and gave him a new life and everything. So there's that, but still. And her mom's going more so on her dad's part. But I'm treading down old memory lane, but still. So that's a lot to process. It's not just Fitz who is going to be dealing with stuff now. She is. And it's interesting, too, because they're still under the impression that, like, Sarge and his people are the one that destroyed everything, but May now knows the truth. So that's going to be interesting to see that. Basically, I guess what's going to end up happening is the fact is that, hey, these two sides are going to end up coming together potentially to face this. It's like, yeah, it's this awkward situation of, yeah, you've been doing some bad, but it's like you're trying to stop these creatures. Actually, after their boss specifically, which I'm wondering who he is, or rather it is. And so I think S.H.I.E.L.D. and these people are going to join forces, which is definitely going to be interesting and weird and awkward considering, once again, Sarge has Coulson's face. So we'll see. Once again, try to figure out what the hell that's all about, because it's like, oh, we'll have to wait and see, because once again, it doesn't seem like they have much memories of it. We'll see what the next episode has in store for us for all of this. But dude, it's such a good episode. Holy crap, it's so much fun. So a lot of heart to it, so I'm very interested to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. I am wondering where the trio, Enoch, Simmons, and Fitz ended up landing. I'd assume they were ending up right back on Earth, but we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.